Working at Accident and Emergency gave me frontline dealing with the public level experience. Now, most of the job was dealing with people with injuries and various states of distress and health problems that would present themselves to the department. An awful lot of people that came in had nothing that was either an accident or an emergency. It was just, for them, more convenient to come to us than it was to go and see their GP. For a number of reasons, it's not always the patient's fault, but a lot of the time it was laziness on their part. One of the things I became accustomed to was dealing with the idiot factor. My first few days in the department, whilst I was undergoing orientation, I heard all the stories of the idiot factor, and I wasn't entirely sure just how commonplace and true the idiot factor actually was. Well, it didn't take long to find out. One of the things I had learned was that they refused to have any form of decorations in the department, simply because the years that they had put a Christmas tree in the waiting room, classically people would urinate on it and would start throwing the decorations around the room, and that was a fairly consistent thing. And having a Christmas tree in the waiting room that smells of piss isn't really a good thing to have in a hospital waiting room. Now, we can only wonder, why would anyone urinate on a Christmas tree in an accident and emergency department? It's the idiot factor. There are always those people who have no concept of others and the needs of others and the dignity and welfare of other people. They are very entitled, absorbed in their own stuff, and are failing to see the impact of their actions upon other people. And often they're having a laugh. It's just a bit of fun on their part, whilst completely disrespecting their fellow man, the staff, the other patients, and so forth. Now, those decorations, by the way, and the Christmas tree was paid for by the staff. This wasn't something that came out of the central funds. This was something the staff would do to try and basically cheer up the place. And I saw firsthand the idiot factor and the level of contempt that members of the public had. Now, one of the lines I would hear most commonly, because we had ridiculously long waiting times, and that wasn't the department's fault, and it wasn't really due to lack of staff, it was too many patients, a very poor government organisation of healthcare provision, which hasn't changed. I don't believe it's improved any different now. And an awful lot of people coming in who shouldn't have been there in the first place. They should have actually gone to the GP, or it was things that can wait. But the line I heard the most, "I know my rights, I pay your wages." Varying forms on that sentence. Most of the people that would say that didn't know their rights, and they certainly did not pay my wages. An awful lot of those people didn't pay any taxes at all, but they still had a sense of entitlement. Now, there's one story for me that has always stuck with me because of just the extraordinary experience that I personally had. And this is the one I want to share for this video. Now, you have to understand how the accident department is organized. You have a central waiting area. There are sub-waiting areas too that most people aren't aware of for various reasons. You may have somebody coming in who's got mental health issues. They might be a domestic violence victim, and we have to separate them for their own safety. The other one is they may have some kind of infection type thing going on, and we separate them for everyone else's safety. And there's various other reasons too. But the central waiting area, and then you have minors, which is where all the non-surgical, non-life-threatening stuff goes through to. And then you have the majors, which is typically the ambulance deliveries, but often people are brought through from the waiting room, depending on the severity of their injury. And there's other areas within the department too. Most people only ever see the minors area, which is always quite calm and very, very quiet, and often there's not many people around. Now, they think that's representative of the entire department. They would have no idea that there's maybe up to 50 to 60 staff working that department in the different areas. They only see a small section of it and assume that is the totality of the department. So when they've been sat out there waiting for 4 hours, and that's a ridiculous length of time, and would come through, people are often quite shocked. Well, where's all the staff? Why have I been waiting for so long? Well, because the staff are elsewhere dealing with bigger level emergencies. Now, on one particular occasion, we were presented with a particular scenario. I'm not going to give you any details of what that scenario entailed, but all I can tell you, it was one of the most horrific things I have ever experienced. Now, it didn't happen to me. It happened to somebody else, well, other people. Now, as a result of what we were presented with, literally every single member of staff was called in to attend with this particular emergency. And so what happens there is you shut down all of your minors areas. All staff are pulled away from things like the plaster room, the suturing areas, all the other areas that treatments are being done, to come and attend to the patients already in the majors side, whilst the particular critical scenario, all sort of the top level staff and people involved in the trauma or the resusc teams go in to deal with that particular scenario. That's what happened. So we've already got a long wait. Now we've closed the minors and all staff, all hands to the pump. Now, I'm actually in the trauma room at the time, helping deal with this particular horror. Now, I've got to just paint a little picture for you. There was so much blood being lost by one of the casualties that we were rapidly emptying the blood bank of all the O-negative emergency blood. O-negative is the universal donor. There was so much blood on the floor, we actually had 2 cleaners in with scoops. When blood is on the floor and it quickly cools, it forms a jelly and it can be scooped up. Now, the reason we had to have the scoops is because people were slipping in the blood. Now, at this point, I'm pretty much covered when we become aware that we're about to become completely out of O-negative. So I say that I will leave the department. Now, outside of this particular room, we have 2 hatchways, 2 doorways, where we have staff filtering in kit and equipment and taking stuff away as it needs to be removed. And I say what I'll do is I'll pull away, and I know where there's more blood elsewhere in the hospital. And so I am now pretty much covered. I've got a white uniform, ridiculous colour, white uniform that's largely red now. And I've got it, just covered. As I come running out into the miners' side to run up to where I know there's a spare blood bank, it's actually up in the orthopaedic unit, and I can get that signed out and get some more units down. I round the corner in the department and I'm picked up off my feet. A gentleman who has stood there, he's got to be in his 50s. He's probably righteous. He's probably affluent and wealthy given his demeanour and his dress and his voice. And literally as I run around the corner, he grabs me by the lapels and throws me against the wall. What he says to me, and I'll never forget the words, "Are you just short-staffed here or fucking incompetent?" Now, he didn't say it like that. He punctuated every word by bashing my head against the wall. I was probably about 22 years old at the time, and here I am trying to assist in saving a particular casualty and go and get some emergency blood, and I'm unable to do that because this man has now chosen to take it upon himself to exact some kind of revenge on a member of staff. And I was just the first person he chanced upon. Now, we've got to look at what is his mindset, what is happening inside his world that he feels justified to behave in such an aggressive, hostile, and impolite manner to a healthcare professional in a very, very obviously, given my demeanour, my dress, and my contamination, very obviously dealing with something. What I did was I wrestled myself free and then carried on running. I had no time to argue with him. I had a mission. I had to go and get that O-negative blood. But what's going on in his mind? It's very, very simple. He has a very limited worldview of what's happening in the department. He's in a waiting room, surrounded by lots and lots of other people who are also going to be irritated and angry and fed up and suffering and pain. And, they pay taxes for this level of service. And they've been sat there for hours without having seen anybody. And they've just been told that you can add pretty much another 2 hours on top of your current waiting time. So I understand. He's then come through the doors, which were then closed, to find an empty department. And there's no one around. And he's putting 2 and 2 together because he thinks he has the totality of the situation. He thinks he can see everything. He's had his irritation and his values and his feelings and all the rest of it fed back to him by behavior of other people in the waiting room. He's come through to try and make a stand, to try and get this sorted out. He's one of those men who will sort things out because there's people like that. And yet actually he doesn't know. He's completely ignorant. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. He thinks he's got the whole picture. And of course then when he sees someone running past in a contaminated uniform, he assumes whatever he wants to assume. What he cannot possibly know, of course, is what's happening the other side of the wall that he was banging my head up against. He had no idea, had no concept of what was happening inside there. Now, in as many times I played that through in the days afterwards of dragging him in there just to show him firsthand what he was actually dealing with. or what we were dealing with, to give them some kind of context. But of course, that didn't happen. I simply had a simple job to get away from this guy, get the blood, get it back to the medical staff to actually deliver that and try and save this particular patient. Then, of course, after all of that, and the exhausting thing of that situation, we then have to reset the trauma room. Now, all the time that's happening, ambulances are still bringing people in. And the wait is going up. And we're going to have all afternoon dealing with angry, fed up, moaning, complaining people who pay my wages and they know their rights. Now, all we were trying to do is do the job that we were paid to do and to save people's lives and to give people treatment. But of course, for the rest of the day, what we're dealing with now are people that have been primed by that one particular gentleman who's now, having said his piece and satisfied himself, and I've wriggled free and run off, has now gone back to the waiting room and probably retold that story about how he's blah, 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 or whatever, made himself the hero of the scene. Because now for the rest of the afternoon, we have a bunch of highly exhausted, stressed staff who've dealt with something unimaginable, who are now having to go and pull splinters out of fingers and suture people up and plaster wrists and so forth, whilst dealing with people who think they know everything and they pay our wages and they know their rights. Now, why am I telling the story? Because I'm getting messages and comments from people who have an exception to the fact that I'm suggesting something very, very simple. Wear a mask, people. Wear a mask. And what we have are people who are then saying, well, who am I, as in me over here, who am I to be giving medical advice? I'm not giving medical advice. I'm following medical advice, and based on experience of clinicians who I still talk to on a regular basis, who are dealing with COVID firsthand. Meanwhile, the people who are the conspiracy nuts, the people who believe anti-masking and are against vaccinations, currently have no first-hand experience. The vast majority of the population who get infected with COVID do not have symptoms. They can have a very mild set of symptoms or they don't have symptoms. Their experience of COVID is, well, it's nothing to worry about because they're not seeing what's happening the other side of the wall of a hospital building. They're not seeing what staff are having to deal with on a daily, endless basis. Because all the time they're dealing with those COVID patients, they're also having to deal with the standard domestic level overload that all hospitals are under anyway. And we're expecting more and more of those staff. Meanwhile, go back a year or so, we had everyone here in the UK out on their doorstep clapping at certain times of day because they were applauding the staff. And yet, we have to question, what did people think they were actually achieving? Maybe a little bit more peer pressure and a little bit more common sense and self-responsibility. Wear a mask, wash your hands. It's not complicated to ask. And yet people will keep posting to me or sending me emails listing out their favorite doctor who has spoken out. The inventor of the mRNA vaccine. He has spoken out against them. Has he? Because did he really invent that? People cherry pick their data, and they cherry pick their data to reinforce their pre-existing worldview in order to remain ignorant. They fail to see what's happening on the other side of that wall, and they will continue to have a go at clinicians and the vaccination centres. They will protest outside schools, they will protest outside hospitals, and they will continue to whip people up into some kind of frenzy. This is absolute madness, and I think it needs to stop.